December 18, 1944. The USS Monterey is rolling 70 degrees to one side. Aircraft are breaking loose on the hangar deck, slamming into bulkheads, exploding into flames. 3 destroyers have already vanished beneath 60-foot waves. 790 American sailors will die today, not from enemy fire, but from something far more unpredictable. A super typhoon has just caught the U.S. Third Fleet completely off guard. This wasn't supposed to happen. These were the most powerful warships on Earth, designed to withstand anything the enemy could throw at them. But Mother Nature had other plans. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about naval warfare. The truth is, when a super typhoon collides with an aircraft carrier at sea, the results can be more devastating than any military engagement. And while modern carriers are technological marvels, the fundamental laws of physics haven't changed since that deadly day in 1944. So what really happens out there when nature unleashes its full fury on these floating cities? Let's find out. To understand what happens when a super typhoon hits a carrier, we first need to understand what these storms actually are. A super typhoon is the Pacific Ocean's version of a major hurricane, but calling it just a storm doesn't do it justice. These are Category 4 or 5 tropical cyclones with sustained winds exceeding 150 miles per hour. The waves they generate can tower 50 to 60 feet high. The rain comes down so hard that visibility drops to just a few feet. And the storm surge? It can raise sea levels by 20 feet or more. Now, an aircraft carrier might seem invincible. The Nimitz-class carriers, the backbone of American naval power, are over 1,000 feet long and weigh more than 100,000 tons when fully loaded. They're powered by nuclear reactors that can push them through the water at speeds exceeding 30 knots. They carry 5,000 sailors and Marines, plus 64 combat aircraft. These are not just ships. They're floating air bases, equipped with some of the most advanced technology ever created. But here's what most people don't realize. Size and power don't make you immune to nature's wrath. In fact, they can sometimes work against you. Let's go back to Typhoon Cobra, the storm that hit Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet in 1944. This wasn't just any fleet. Task Force 38 consisted of 7 fleet carriers, 6 light carriers, 8 battleships, 15 cruisers, and about 50 destroyers. They had just finished 3 days of heavy raids against Japanese airfields in the Philippines. The fleet needed to refuel, especially the destroyers, which were running dangerously low on fuel. If you've ever witnessed extreme weather at sea or know someone who served in the Navy during rough conditions, share your experience in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories. By 9:00 a.m. on December 18th, the storm consumed the fleet. On the USS Monterey, aircraft that were supposed to be secured on the hangar deck broke loose from their cables. The crew of the Monterey spent the next hour fighting for their lives, battling fires while the ship rolled so violently that walking became impossible. 3 sailors died. 18 aircraft were destroyed. Another 16 were damaged beyond repair. Among those fighting the fires was a young officer named Gerald Ford. Yes, the man who would later become the 38th President of the United States. Ford later recalled how he was nearly washed overboard while planes crashed into each other like pinballs. Then there were the destroyers, the USS Hull, USS Spence, and USS Monaghan, 3 destroyers that had served with distinction throughout the Pacific Campaign, simply disappeared. The Spence went down with 317 men, only 23 survived. The Monaghan took 256 sailors with her. Only 6 made it out alive. Before we go further into what happens to modern carriers in these conditions, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Over 98% of viewers watch our content without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but makes a huge difference in helping us bring you more stories like this. Thank you for your support. Now, you might be thinking, that was 1944. Technology has improved. Modern carriers are different. You're absolutely right. But you're also wrong. Modern aircraft carriers are engineering masterpieces. The Nimitz class and the newer Ford-class carriers are designed with stability in mind. Their center of buoyancy is positioned higher than their center of gravity, which creates what engineers call a righting moment. The farther the ship tilts, the stronger the force trying to push it back upright. They have wide hulls, sophisticated ballast systems, and numerous watertight compartments that can be sealed off independently. If one section floods, it won't sink the entire ship. They also have something their World War II predecessors didn't have: advanced weather tracking. Modern carriers have access to satellite imagery, computer modeling, and real-time data from weather stations around the globe. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center, operated by the U.S. Navy, tracks every tropical cyclone in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Carriers can see storms developing days in advance and plot courses to avoid them entirely. But here's the critical point. Even with all this technology, carriers aren't invincible, and sometimes avoidance isn't possible. In 1989, the aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson was en route to Busan, South Korea, when it encountered a super typhoon. The commanding officer later described trying to maneuver to the least damaging part of the storm, but getting caught firmly in its grip. For what seemed like a lifetime, the massive carrier was at the mercy of the sea. They survived, but it was, in his words, not fun. In May 2023, Super Typhoon Mawar struck Guam with 150-mile-per-hour winds, one of the strongest storms to hit the territory in over 20 years. The USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group was operating south of Japan at the time. The Navy immediately ordered the Nimitz, along with its escort ships, to assist in disaster relief. But before they could help Guam, they had to move their ships out to sea, away from the island, as a standard precaution against the storm. This is standard operating procedure. When a major typhoon is approaching, the Navy moves its ships out of port and into open water. It sounds counterintuitive, but it makes sense. In port, ships are restricted in their movement. They can be slammed against piers, thrown into other vessels, or pushed onto rocks and reefs. Out at sea, they have room to maneuver. They can adjust their heading, change speed, and ride out the storm in deeper water where the waves, while massive, are more predictable than near the coastline. But what happens when they can't avoid it? What happens when a carrier gets caught in the worst part of a super typhoon? First, the flight deck becomes unusable. You can't launch or recover aircraft when the ship is rolling 20, 30, or 40 degrees. You can't even keep aircraft secured on the deck if the wind is strong enough. During Typhoon Cobra, 7 planes on the carrier USS Cowpens were washed overboard. The escort carrier USS Kwajalein rolled 39 degrees and had to jettison 3 aircraft just to lighten the load. Across the fleet, 146 aircraft were lost, not from combat, but from being destroyed by the storm. Modern carriers secure everything before a storm hits. Aircraft are moved below deck into the hangar bays. Everything on the flight deck, from chocks and chains to tractors and tool carts, is either lashed down with heavy chains or moved inside. The ship goes into what's called high readiness state, where it essentially becomes an airtight steel box. Hatches are sealed. Ventilation systems are adjusted. Watertight doors are closed and dogged tight. But even with all these precautions, damage still happens. Waves can come over the flight deck, and we're talking about a deck that sits 60 feet above the waterline on a Nimitz-class carrier. Antennas can be ripped off. Radar systems can be damaged. Anything not properly secured becomes a projectile that can cause injuries or secondary damage. The deck itself can buckle under the force of massive waves crashing down on it. Below deck, the hangar bay is a different kind of danger zone. This is where the real nightmare scenario can unfold. If aircraft break loose despite being chained down, they become battering rams. Each fighter jet weighs between 12,000 and 24,000 pounds empty, and significantly more when loaded with fuel and weapons. When the ship rolls violently, these aircraft can snap their restraints and careen across the hangar deck, smashing into each other, into bulkheads, into anything in their path. And when aircraft collide, fuel tanks rupture, hydraulic lines burst, electrical systems spark, fires break out. On the USS Monterey in 1944, the fires became so intense that the crew had to evacuate the boiler rooms. The Monterey survived, but barely. She required repairs that took months to complete. Let's talk about the human element, because this is where things become truly challenging. Imagine being inside a massive ship that's rolling 30, 40, or 50 degrees back and forth. Everything that isn't bolted down becomes airborne. Sailors can be thrown across compartments. Injuries are common: broken bones, concussions, lacerations. Medical teams have to treat casualties while the ship is pitching and rolling violently. Sleep becomes impossible. Eating becomes difficult. Even basic tasks like moving through the ship turn into dangerous exercises. Sailors have to time their movements between rolls, grabbing handrails and door frames, waiting for the ship to stabilize before taking their next step. Seasickness affects even experienced sailors when the motion becomes this extreme. And this isn't just for a few hours. Super typhoons can batter a ship for 12, 18, even 24 hours straight. The psychological toll is significant. These sailors know their history. They know about Typhoon Cobra. They know that even the most powerful warships can be overwhelmed by nature. They know that 3 destroyers sank in 1944, taking over 700 men with them, and yet they stay at their posts. They maintain the reactors. They fight fires. They keep the ship operational. This is what true professionalism looks like. This is what the men and women of the United States Navy do every single day. Now, here's something most people don't consider: the aftermath. Once the typhoon passes, the work doesn't stop. Damage assessment teams inspect every inch of the ship. They check for structural damage, for cracks in the hull, for compromised watertight integrity. They inventory damaged or lost equipment. They repair what they can at sea and make notes about what needs shipyard-level repairs. If aircraft were damaged, they have to determine whether they can be repaired or if they're total losses. If communication systems were knocked out, they have to restore them. If the flight deck was damaged, they have to make emergency repairs to get it operational again, because the carrier still has a mission to complete, and often, that mission involves helping others. After Super Typhoon Mawar hit Guam in 2023, the USS Nimitz didn't just survive the storm, it became a critical asset in the relief effort. The carrier served as a communications hub for local authorities whose infrastructure had been destroyed. Helicopters from Carrier Air Wing 17 flew supplies and personnel to areas that were cut off by flooding and debris. This is what our military does. They face danger, survive it, and then immediately shift to helping those in need. But let's address the elephant in the room. With all our technology, with all our engineering prowess, can a modern aircraft carrier actually sink from a typhoon? The honest answer is, probably not, but it's not impossible. Modern carriers are incredibly stable. The only aircraft carrier in U.S. Navy history to capsize was the USS Hornet in 1942, and that was after suffering catastrophic combat damage from Japanese torpedoes and bombs, not from weather. Carriers have been battered by typhoons, hurricanes, and severe storms for decades, and none have been lost to weather alone. However, and this is important, probably not isn't the same as definitely not. If a carrier suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure at the worst possible moment, say, losing all power and steering while caught in the most violent part of a Category 5 super typhoon, the outcome could be very different. Without power, the ship becomes a 100,000-ton piece of driftwood, unable to steer into the waves, unable to maintain stability. The USS Monterey came dangerously close to this scenario in 1944. If her crew hadn't regained control when they did, we might be telling a very different story. The real danger isn't so much the carrier itself sinking, it's everything else that can go wrong. Fires, explosions, structural damage that compromises the ship's integrity, loss of operational capability, injuries and loss of life. A carrier that survives a super typhoon but loses half its air wing, has extensive fire damage, and has dozens of injured crew members isn't really operational anymore, even if it's still floating. This is why the Navy's first line of defense is avoidance. With modern weather tracking, there's almost no excuse for sailing into a typhoon. Almost. But what about situations where avoidance isn't an option? What if the carrier is conducting critical operations and can't leave the area? What if the storm changes course unexpectedly, as they sometimes do? This is where the skill and experience of the captain and crew become paramount. These aren't merchant mariners sailing cargo ships. These are highly trained naval officers who have spent years studying ship handling, weather patterns, and emergency procedures. They know how to read the sea. They know how to position the ship relative to the waves to minimize rolling. They know when to increase speed and when to slow down. They know how to balance keeping the ship safe while still maintaining mission readiness. And the crew? These are some of the most professional sailors in the world. From the youngest seaman to the most experienced chief petty officer, everyone knows their role. Everyone trains for these scenarios. The United States Navy doesn't just hope things will work out. They prepare relentlessly for every possible contingency. Let's put this in perspective. In over 70 years of supercarrier operations, from the USS Forrestal in 1955 to the USS Gerald R. Ford today, the U.S. Navy has never lost a carrier to weather. Not one. That's not luck. That's engineering, preparation, training, and the sheer determination of our sailors to keep these vessels safe no matter what nature throws at them. But that doesn't mean the threat isn't real. Climate change is making super typhoons more frequent and more intense. Ocean temperatures are rising, which provides more energy for these storms to feed on. We're seeing typhoons that intensify rapidly, giving less warning time. We're seeing storms that maintain their strength longer and over wider areas. The Navy is adapting. Newer carriers like the Ford class incorporate lessons learned from decades of operations. Hull designs are refined. Structural reinforcements are added in critical areas. Storm response protocols are constantly updated based on the latest data and real-world experiences. But at the end of the day, you can't engineer your way past the laws of physics. A 60-foot wave carries enormous energy. Wind at 150 miles per hour exerts tremendous force. The ocean, when it decides to flex its muscles, is more powerful than anything humanity has ever built. So what happens when a super typhoon hits a U.S. aircraft carrier at sea? The ship battens down. The crew prepares. Every sailor takes their position. The captain makes the hard decisions: which way to steer, how fast to go, when to ride it out, and when to run. And then they endure. For hours, sometimes days, they ride out the storm, maintaining their posts, fighting fires if they break out, making repairs where they can, and trusting in the ship, in their training, and in each other. Most of the time, the carrier survives. Damaged, perhaps. Battered, certainly. But afloat and operational. Because that's what these ships are built to do. And that's what the sailors who crew them are trained to do. It's a testament to American engineering and American resolve. These carriers represent decades of technological advancement, billions of dollars in development costs, and the accumulated knowledge of generations of naval architects and shipbuilders. But more than that, they represent the courage and professionalism of the men and women who take them to sea, knowing full well that the ocean is an unpredictable and often hostile environment. When you see an aircraft carrier pulling into port after surviving a super typhoon, you're not just seeing a ship. You're seeing triumph over nature. You're seeing the result of thousands of individual decisions made correctly under extreme pressure. You're seeing what happens when training, technology, and human determination come together. And that's something worth appreciating. Conclusion. The next time you hear about a typhoon in the Pacific, think about the carrier strike groups out there. Think about the sailors maintaining watch, the engineers keeping the reactors running, the damage control teams standing ready. They're out there doing one of the toughest jobs on Earth, and they do it with excellence. If you found this video informative, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about our military and the extraordinary people who serve. Thanks for watching.